in this excerpt from Sicilian Vespers by Verdi, we have two very different styles of excerpt. The first one, very bold, agitato, so a lot of kind of angst, big energy, fortissimo. The second excerpt, much more lyrical, melodic, smooth lines, but with the same tempo. It's still having forward motion and still keeping rhythmic integrity as we play. So talking about the first excerpt, fortissimo marcato with accents. So again, it's very full orchestra, brass quality, big accents, and we really want to sustain our fortissimo throughout this whole excerpt. Really working on kind of getting that ping to the beginning of the accented quarter notes throughout and keeping our dynamic up. Now, make sure that this is a really important one to go through and make sure that you pay attention to the difference in these rhythms, starting in the third measure, this little bum ba da dum, because each time, or I shouldn't say each time, sometimes they're a little bit different, and we want to make sure that we're playing the 32nd notes at the right time, and we're playing 16th notes when we have the 16th notes. So the way I recommend practicing this is, if we go off of our marked tempo, we have half note equals 80. I would practice this most of the time with your quarter notes. So quarter note at 160. We'll go a little bit slower for now. So this is going to be your best friend practicing with the quarter notes. Then eventually we can go into cut time, but we want to make sure that that rhythmic integrity is here. What I also like to do is, even with this quarter note pulse, I like to think of eighth notes. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. That's going to help me come out of these little awkward 30-second note passages at the right time. So if you're thinking eighth notes, if we're thinking in measure, the third measure after F, if we just look at the structural eighth notes, we have a G accented eighth note, then we have a D 16th note, and then we have a G quarter note after that, which would sound like this if I just play these structural points. Right? So then it's a matter of fitting in the 30-second notes right before beat 2. That's how I like to practice it, because we want to make sure that we come out of that figure right on beat 2. So the same rhythm applies in measure 127, bum, 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 where we have E flat to B flat, back to an E flat quarter note. Also equally important, when you're practicing this and recording, listen to your rests. We want to make sure that bum ba da dum, 3 4 1 2 3 4 bum. You want to make sure that you're coming out of these rests at the right time. That's important, and it's easier to tell when you're listening to your recordings back. It's difficult when you're just practicing it on your own. So that one's the same. The next one is the same. And then just make sure that you notice in measure 132 and 134 that we just have that eighth note, 2 16th notes, and a quarter note. So it's a little bit different. So measure 132. Again, those are the eighth note structure. And then measure 134. Different than the 30-second passages. So it seems like a picky thing, but I think you want to kind of dive into that rhythmic difference and really make sure that you're counting that properly. And it goes by really fast, but it's going to, analyzing that a little bit is going to help you get out of that at the right time and play with accurate rhythm and keep the overall pulse. So especially when we go back into our halftime. Bum bum bum, bum ba da dum. We want to have that ingrained in our head. We can't rely on the metronome, especially with these larger beats, to give us that rhythm. It's going to help a little bit. Other than that, for this one, that energy and that agitato motion stays throughout. So you just kind of keep that, it keeps getting a little bit more agitated. Each statement happens a little bit sooner, less rests between each of these little figures. And so that adds to this sense of urgency, which is part of that character that we want. So in the second half, or the second excerpt that we have mezzo forte espressivo, very expressive, very long lyrical lines. We still have that underlying pulse, so we want to be very rhythmic. We don't want to slow down, and you don't want to delay the rhythms or be a little bit too indulgent. We want to make sure that you're still practicing with this with the metronome, and that you have a nice even rhythm throughout. And then just we generally follow these same hairpin dynamics of two measures of a nice gradual controlled crescendo to the top, to the highest note, and then we control our diminuendo to the end of the phrase, and that repeats a few times. So work on going all the way to the F sharp and making sure that you reach that peak dynamic that you want at that point. That should be the loudest point of the phrase. And then from there, we started our fullest dynamic, and we diminuendo all the way to the end of the following measure. Now, typically we would expect to start another diminuendo here, but if we notice at measure 168, we have a diminuendo in that whole measure, which means the previous measure we ended softly, but here somehow we have to get softer again throughout. So it's encouraged to at the beginning of measure 68, we actually want to increase our dynamic level. We want to start that a little bit louder, so that allows us to have room to diminuendo and control our hairpin dynamics for the following phrase. So, ba da da dee dum, dee da da dum. So on that E, we bring up the volume again, perhaps to mezzo forte, starting at the beginning of 168. So make sure you're paying attention to those crescendos and diminuendos, and to me it's helpful to just go ahead and write in a stronger dynamic in 168 so that we remember to start that stronger. Similar thing happens in 176, but they have a forte marked. You know, the previous measure we've diminuendoed, and then we kind of immediately start at a stronger dynamic to kind of interrupt that like sweet lyrical line. This is another great opportunity to work on your intonation, to work on your vibrato, see if we can really control vibrato. You want to have vibrato starting from that very first half note. We want that to be a really rich, beautiful half note with vibrato, and work on continuing to vibrate as you move up through these scales. Every one of these notes, even the eighth notes, can have one little spin of vibrato in them. The only other thing I'll kind of address towards the end of this, in measure 176, be very careful about the dotted quarter note, eighth note rhythm. We want to make sure that that rhythm is correct and that we're not turning it into a triplet rhythm. Dum, da, dum, da, dum. And I would encourage you not to over adjust for these wider intervals. Really try to keep consistent, smooth air throughout. Keep the breath support engaged, but we don't need to do too much embouchure manipulation in order for these low notes to work out, or it will affect the pitch too much.